Hello students, welcome to Shore of Sirs classes, and today we are going to discuss a very common problem that any student who has ever studied English literature has faced. Be it in school or in college, anyone who has studied English literature has to study Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare is one of the most important, if not the most important playwright to have graced this planet. So it's invariably we have to study Shakespeare, and invariably all of us at some point of time in our lives have faced the problem of not understanding Shakespeare. In fact, most students, when they start off reading Shakespeare, at least in school, find Shakespeare boring or dry, too complicated or too dense. So today we are going to talk about how can we make studying Shakespeare an enjoyable process. And this is especially for you guys. If you're preparing Shakespeare for your school or your college, you must be facing the same problem or something similar, that you do not understand why is the plot so complex, why is the language not accessible, you don't like reading the text, you only end up reading summaries which do not really prepare you for the examination. So today we are going to focus on whether we can make Shakespeare interesting for us to study without the help of a teacher. So the first point I'm going to focus on is the fact that we often ignore the fact that Shakespeare wrote for the plays to be performed. So he was not writing for us to read it necessarily. Obviously on paper the text is brilliant, but sometimes it's lost in translation because we haven't seen the performance of Macbeth or Hamlet or As You Like It. When we are studying it, we are only reading the words. But Alec Padamsee, the famous Indian actor who has done a lot of Shakespeare, once said that the real Shakespeare lies between the audience's ears and the actor's mouth. So sometimes discovering the real Shakespeare can make it more interesting by watching a performance. Again, it's not possible for everyone to catch a Shakespeare play even if it's running in your town. So if it's possible, do go and watch any Shakespeare play which is running in your city at the moment. But if not, there are a lot of options. There are plenty of resources, plenty of videos on YouTube of recorded performances of great Shakespearean plays. And if you're studying Macbeth, for instance, you can definitely check out the different versions of Macbeth that exist on YouTube, recorded productions of the Royal Shakespeare Company. There's a very famous one with Ian McKellen and Judi Dench performing. So when you see those stellar actors performing Shakespeare, you get an idea of what the text is. It's sometimes easy to understand, it's engrossing, and you can see all the special effects with the witches appearing and all the entire, you can see the assassination scene of Julius Caesar on stage being done by so many companies, so many videos, and automatically it gets more interesting. When you read Mark Antony's speech, obviously you realize how brilliant it is as a text, but when you see it performed, you understand it more clearly because an actor, through their gestures, through their modulation, through their actions, often simplify what is being written. Then you can understand some of the more complex metaphors also. So the best way to understand Shakespeare is to watch Shakespeare in performance. And Royal Shakespeare Company and National Theatre are two of the channels, two very successful British theatre companies with a lot of history, who do Shakespeare quite regularly, and I think it will be great if you start off with these videos depending on whichever play you're studying. And the second point is obviously the next best thing, and some of us are already aware of that: films. Shakespeare lends itself to different film adaptations, and there are tons of adaptations of Shakespeare in Hollywood, in Bollywood. For those of you who are familiar with Indian cinema, you must be knowing how Vishal Bharadwaj does Shakespeare in a very unique, Indianized way, be it with films like Maqbool, Omkara or Haider. It's automatically you can understand how he's adapting Shakespeare, and it's very interesting to see. And in Hollywood, obviously, like the most recent example being Michael Fassbender's Macbeth, in which he played Macbeth with Marion Cotillard playing Lady Macbeth. Then it gets very interesting because we are familiar with films, we really enjoy watching movies, and the moment we see a Shakespearean line in a movie, it automatically becomes simpler, it automatically becomes more exciting for us. So best way to do is, if you're like studying As You Like It, go and see the BBC adaptation of As You Like It on YouTube, because YouTube has tons of such resources. You can even buy the DVDs of these films if you really want to see them, and it's automatically interesting, and then you can sum up the story in your head without reading a Wikipedia summary by simply watching the film. And because we are so used to visual mediums and audiovisual aids are used in so many teaching methods today that it gets extremely easy for us to concentrate on a visual medium, which is a film or a performance. Thirdly, the language of Shakespeare is often, we find it difficult because it's dense, it's complex, it's poetic, full of metaphors and all kinds of figures of speeches that you have probably learned. But I think the best part about Shakespeare, which we often miss as students, is the fact that language has a tremendous sense of musicality. The fact that we like a kind of music because there's a certain rhythm to it. Shakespeare has brilliant rhythm, and it's for us to discover the rhythm first, and then we'll start enjoying the language. Then it wouldn't seem that complex. See, with tons of websites, there are resources in which they translate Shakespeare in English into modern English, so you can automatically get something which is almost like a movie subtitle. You read the meaning side by side. But once you discover the beauty of Shakespeare's language, that there's a rhythm, when you read it aloud, I think the best part as a student in which you can make Shakespeare interesting is by reading him aloud. When you read Shakespeare aloud, you realize that there's a musicality to it and you start enjoying the language, because otherwise Shakespeare will always seem difficult if we shun ourselves away from the language thinking it's too complex, it's too difficult. And fourth, point that I would like to talk about is obviously something which is very understood, that why is Shakespeare timeless? Context and themes. For example, you can talk about modern international politics, and which we are all aware of, and also talk about Julius Caesar in the same vein, because Julius Caesar mirrors fascism. Julius Caesar talks about fascism. Julius Caesar is about autocracy, is about dictatorship, problems we're facing in the world even today. So you can automatically draw parallels between the Roman Empire and any other country with a dictator in the world today, and you will understand the distinction and the similarities, and then it gets interesting. Then when you read an article about North Korea, you're automatically thinking about Julius Caesar. So when you going back in school or college and studying Julius Caesar, it doesn't seem detached, alienated, or something which is difficult to understand, because you have modern examples in every Shakespearean context to understand it better. The problems Shakespeare's characters face, like Hamlet or Macbeth, the problems they face are universal. The crisis is universal. And you can find modern examples and references. So automatically, if you constantly think about what is the closest modern example to what Macbeth is facing, it gets interesting, because then you can connect everyday news items, everyday articles you read, and even modern novels or modern poems that you're reading to Shakespeare. It all roots back to him. So then you can understand why it's interesting. And again, another point which is obviously important is pop culture. Find out how Shakespeare has been interpreted, why and how he is quoted by people in songs. Your favorite songs might have a reference to Shakespeare. Your favorite films might have a reference to Shakespeare. Your favorite Netflix TV show right now might be alluding to a Shakespearean plot. For example, Anurag Kashyap's Gangs of Wasipur is a very Shakespearean film. It does not allude to any particular Shakespeare play, but again, the structure and the crisis the hero faces, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy. So because we are familiar with Anurag Kashyap, we enjoy his films, it's very important for us to understand that how he is interpreting Shakespeare. It gets interesting for us because we are finding a bit of Shakespeare in everything, which is true. A bit of Shakespeare exists in all kinds of pop culture. It exists in songs, it exists in films, people refer to him in advertisements, people refer to him in TV shows, web series. So it's important for us to find how people and why they're enjoying and referring to Shakespeare. Then it becomes enjoyable for us. And last but not the least, we must remember that Shakespeare was not writing to bore us. He was writing to assure that there's entertainment. He was a people's playwright. He was extremely populist. He kept in mind that I have an audience to cater to. And it's very important for us to know that because someone is catering to an audience, they're writing for entertainment. So we need to find the entertainment value and quotient in Shakespeare for us to enjoy. In fact, Shakespeare is one of the more entertaining, one of the more popular, one of the most interesting things that you will ever come across in your English curriculum. So instead of shunning it away by thinking that Shakespeare is difficult or not accessible through these mediums by watching his performances, watching films based on him, discovering the musicality of his language. In fact, there's a brilliant TEDx video where this rapper talks about how Shakespearean sonnets in meter are very similar to hip-hop songs. So again, there are people doing these experiments, people finding out, rediscovering Shakespeare in their own way. And as students, when we rediscover a person, when we realize how entertaining he is, even in today's context, so then it becomes interesting for us. And no matter how we are taught Shakespeare in schools, in our colleges, we can always come back home and rediscover him in our own way, which would make Shakespeare, reading Shakespeare, understanding Shakespeare, and writing exam answers about Shakespeare extremely interesting, because now we know what he is about. We haven't read Wikipedia summaries. We know what Macbeth talks about. We know what Hamlet talks about. We know how As You Like It has a lot of veiled themes, because we have seen films about it. We have seen performances. We understand the language. And then reading Shakespeare becomes an enjoyable and entertaining process, exactly how he intended his plays to be. Thank you so much, and I hope this video will help you and make Shakespeare interesting for you in the near future.